So in Georgia, in that case brought by Fani Willis, and you remember Nathan Wade, who had to step away from the case after taking nearly $1 million of taxpayer money as a specialist in RICO who had never done a RICO case. So that case, which had multiple defendants from the Trump world, it was really one of the, I'd say, top, if you want to talk about persecution, not just prosecution, but persecution of those who were advising President Trump on different options he had as president. Some of those options might have been wrong. Some of those options might have been right legally. Others were just thinking about ideas. Has this been tried? Has this ever been tried in an actual court, even if it's a long shot? And yet they use that as a potential for crimes. This case, remember, was up on appeal because the lower court judge said that Fani Willis did not have to remove herself from the case, recuse herself from the case, if Nathan Wade was actually removed. And the Trump legal team, rightfully so, said, no, you can't just remove him. She's the biggest wrongdoer here by bringing him on. And this entire prosecution, she needs to be removed from, and this DA's office needs to be reviewed from. Well, that got appealed to the Georgia Court of Appeals. But yesterday, late in the afternoon, the Georgia Court of Appeals canceled oral arguments that were actually scheduled for next month on whether she should have to fully recuse herself. And again, now all we got in the order was the case is hereby canceled until further order of this court. No explanation. And of course, people are trying to figure out exactly, trying to read the tea leaves on a very short and simple statement, but yet another major delay in a case that's not even about whether President Trump or the other defendants should these continue to be fought in court, but whether or not she should even be there.
That's right. It's a simple one-sentence order about the oral argument scheduled to take place on December 5th, 2024 at 10:30 a.m. is hereby canceled until further order of this court. Now, we know that the lower court judge had basically laid out the roadmap of how the appeals court could take Fani Willis off. He pointed to things that were improper, if not illegal. He mentioned the odor of mendacity lingering in this case. And so it was long thought that the Court of Appeals may remove Fani Willis from this case. This sets up a level of intrigue now about what happens next. And we're going to have Professor Harry Hutchison on in the next segment to discuss maybe some of those options, because now there is a completely different set of facts and a world surrounding this case now that President Trump has been reelected, as well as the Supreme Court order on immunity. When many of these issues that happen, the phone calls between state leaders, that Fani Willis was trying to cast as a RICO case, a corrupt organization's racketeering case, may have fallen, and indeed, based off the Supreme Court decision on immunity, would seem to fall within what would be presidentially immune as an official act of the president. So we're going to have to talk with Professor Hutchison and see what maybe some of the outcomes are. But it all points to this case also falling potentially by the wayside once again.
This is not even the appeal on the actual charges she brought. So this case has gotten really delayed.
When you look at this order on the face of it, it may strike some people as, well, they canceled the hearing on the appeal, so isn't that a negative for President Trump? As you read the tea leaves, as Professor Hutchison brings up, it appears that the appellate court is now looking at the entire context of where this case is. One, the immunity ruling from the Supreme Court, which hadn't really been in play here, as well as that President Trump has won re-election. It gives them an opportunity at the appeals level to say, hey, we don't even need to hear this yet, this appeal, whether she should be on, because now that there's all this other context, the trial court should be the one deciding whether or not this case should even be in court before we hear an appeal on whether or not Fani Willis should remain on the case. So I think it gives the appeals court an opportunity to kick it back down to the lower court and have that issue sorted out. Judge McAfee, many observers looked at it and said he was up for re-election, and he laid out the roadmap, but then essentially moved the decision down to the appeals court for having her removed. He doesn't have that political specter hanging over him anymore. But another thing to look at, and I think this is quite interesting when it comes to the lawfare angle of this, is that, remember, this was all based off of President Trump fighting hard to try to win Georgia. He was calling election officials. They hinged on his language that maybe he said, find me 11,000 votes. And he meant that literally. Go out and find them instead of look at all the places you have. Are there ballots?
The question now, Harry, I think people are probably asking is this delayed because the entire case falls, like some of what you saw with Jack Smith and others, that these cases fall because they used evidence and witnesses and testimony that the Supreme Court then said should not be allowed and cannot be allowed in court?
I think that is the answer. So I would argue that the Supreme Court has ruled very definitively that when presidents engage in official acts, that conduct is arguably immune from basically scrutiny by the prosecutor. Also, when presidents engage in unofficial acts, but within the purview of their constitutional power, there is a presumption that those acts are also immune. And so if we look at the Fani Willis case in Georgia, I think it is clear beyond question that the prosecution essentially relied on official conduct by President Trump. So arguably, that case should be voided. But we have the additional complication, of course, of Fani Willis's relationship with Nathan Wade. And as you correctly point out, Mr. Wade received approximately $1 million, and there is evidence in the record suggesting that Fani Willis benefited from those monies. They went on trips together, they went out for dinner together, and of course, Mr. Wade paid at least for some of those expenses. So I suspect the Georgia Court of Appeals has read the tea leaves. They recognize this case is really going nowhere. And what they may wind up doing is remanding the case to the district court Judge McAfee so that he can dispose of this particular case. So I think at the end of the day, Fani Willis will be entitled to experience, and the Georgia taxpayers will be out $1 million. And essentially what we've seen is a waste of money.